Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another repair video for you. Behind me I have a 1999 2.3 Acura CL, pretty much the same thing, well it is the same thing as a Honda Accord, about the same vintage. They just slap some different Acura badges on it. In fact, those of you in Europe, you don't even know what an Acura is. That's okay. In addition to the clutch failing on this vehicle, I also inspected the clutch hydraulics. It's actually quite common for clutch hydraulics to go out on Hondas. So we are going to replace the clutch master, which I found to be leaking, and I'll show you that. Also, while we're at it, we might as well replace the slave. So I'm going to replace the clutch master and slave. This clutch video will be featured at a later date. I'm not going to say when because these things take a long time to edit. So you may ask yourself, Eric, how do I know whether or not I need clutch hydraulics? Well, you're looking at it right here. Look to where the clutch pedal terminates up the top towards the firewall. And if you see it leaking like that, it's bad. Another symptom that sometimes happens when they completely fail is the clutch pedal will go to the floor and it won't return. If that happens, then 9 times out of 10 you can look right up here and you will see that fluid is leaking out. And you need to replace said parts. So we will go through the process right now. All right, when we come outside under the engine compartment, or into the engine compartment I should say, we'll find a couple of things. We'll find the clutch reservoir, which is here, and there is the other side to that master cylinder that we are about to replace. Now, before I actually get started, I like to take a little bit of penetrating oil and hit that fitting. Let that soak in for a little bit, but we are first going to remove this 10 millimeter here to get the reservoir out of the way. It's just a single fastener. As I said, it's 10 millimeter. This makes it so we can have better access down in here. Now, in order to loosen the line, I am going to strongly recommend the use of a flare wrench, or also called a tubing wrench. If not, you may round off this fitting, and if you do that, it's going to suck. So don't do that. And the way to avoid doing that is to use a flare wrench. Now I love mine because they're nice and thick, and they tend to work extremely well. So in this case, for this one, this is a 12 millimeter. Once it's broken loose, it's going to get a lot easier. In fact, once it's broken loose, you don't need to worry about using the flare end anymore. You can quite simply use the open end, like this one has an open end on the other side. Love this set of flare wrenches. They were really expensive, but worth every penny. And one other thing, brake fluid sort of eats away at paint. So in order to minimize that, I'm going to take an old rag and stick it down underneath there. It's still going to leak out some, but at least that'll catch some of what's coming down. So I'll just slip this down underneath everything. And hopefully it'll catch the majority of the brake fluid that is inevitably going to leak out. There we go. We have broken free. And despite my efforts to catch the brake fluid, of course it's still leaking down through. So also a good idea to put a pan underneath the vehicle to catch anything that's going to drip out there. And now comes, well, probably the worst part of the whole thing. Now, this is probably the only time I'm going to be able to show you this, because it's going to be difficult to be in there to show you the removal of this. You can see that there's a cotter pin there that needs to be removed. Now it's really difficult, like I said, to have the camera and me in there at the same time, and that cotter pin is going to be difficult to get to. I'm just going to warn you right now. I use this set of pliers. These are like this long pliers to grab hold of them. once I've got the back end straightened out, I grab hold of it with these pliers and just pull it down through. And that seems to be the most effective method that I found. But I've got to say that it's a little tight up in there. It's a little tricky to see, and it's a little difficult to show you with this angle and this confined space. So I'll do my best. All right, I initially just reach up with my fingers and just sort of feel around the cotter pin and get the ends lined up so that I can start pulling it through. Grab that pair of pliers I talked about, and then try to force it back down through. It can be a fight. And now that I've mangled it, I got to straighten it because I've got to reuse it. Now this isn't as critical as, like, say, a ball joint or something like that. You know, as far as cotter pins go. Well, I might have messed this one up pretty good. In fact, I messed this one up good enough to where I think I will replace it. See if I can find one small enough. I can check my stash. In a way, the hard part's over, because now you may be able to see that pin that runs through that I'm about to push through here. So there's what the cotter pin was attached to. Pull that guy out. Ah, there we go. So now it's just a matter of removing two fasteners. There's a 12 here and a 12 that's way up there. You can sort of see it tucked in the back there. You got those two 12s. I'll show you the tool and the methods that I use to get them. All right, here's the rig that I use. I have this long extension, 3/8 universal, and then I have a 12mm deep. The reason I have a deep is because they're studs, and putting a shallow on there, you're not going to be able to get a full bite. But I think this is a 10-inch extension, and well, it might be longer than that. It might be 12. And I just slide it up in there and get the fasteners. I do the hard one first, the one on the left. One. It's free! Alright, well, before I get that master cylinder out of there, here's that pin. Here's my old cotter pin. And here's one of the new ones I have. This is a pretty small size, but it's not small enough to fit through that opening. So I had to go really small in order to find one, but I was able to find a very small cotter pin. So you may be stuck. You may have to try to find some way to straighten something like that, but maybe the best bet is to watch this video first and have one of these cotter pins at the ready before you go there. Right, now that we're loose on the inside, I'm going to pull up on my line and remove it from the master, and then I'm just going to grab the master and pull it out towards me. There is a gasket. Don't lose it. We have our old and new master cylinders side by side here. It's a good time to compare your new parts to make sure that they match up with the old parts. We're going to have to take our reservoir and swap it over from the old one to the new one. Also, like on this, they have a this little clamp here. So what I like to do at this point this may not be screwed onto your aftermarket part, because this is an aftermarket part, is to loosen the jam nut, and then make sure you can sort of eyeball these to see if you can get them to be the same. But to be honest, my experience with new master cylinders is they may fall differently. So this, we're initially going to have to set the free play with this. So in order to do that, we're going to have to make sure that everything up here is loose. One more thing I'll recommend is that you take it and just push the plunger in a couple of times. Sometimes they're a little sticky, but if you do this for like the first time, you should be good. Quite simply, to remove the reservoir, there's a Phillips head screw on a clamp. Hopefully it comes loose. If not, you can always replace the clamp. It's not that big a deal. There's no pressure here. This is just where it comes in. So all the pressure pretty much ends here, so you don't really have to worry about leaks here. Of course, you want to avoid them, but it's not like it's a huge problem. And there we have the ugly black goo that is pretty much the inside of this rubber hose and the rest of the rubber hose in the system. After a while, the brake fluid turns acidic and starts to eat away at rubber parts. It's actually a good idea to bleed this clutch fluid out, maybe every 60,000 miles. If you did that, you might not have this failure. But to be honest, these are super common failures, especially if you use a high-performance clutch. Those high-performance clutches put a lot more strain on the master cylinder. So if you use that, you may find that you go through clutch hydraulics a little more quickly. Now, because this is also full of goo and gook, I'm going to take this over to the trash can and clean it out with some brake cleaner. That looks a lot better, don't you think? I think so. I also ran a little through this hose, and end result, very pleased with that. Here we have our new part, and we have our cleaned assembly. I also cleaned the cap off a little bit. It's pretty simple. You just put the hose on and tighten down the clamp. It's easier to do this now rather than try to do it in the car, don't you think? Just going to reinstall the cap, keep stuff from getting down in there. Let's put this on the car. You are now faced with the illustrious task of fishing this thing back down in there, and you saw, what degree of difficulty I had removing it. There's a couple of notes. First is, let's get our gasket on before we forget. So we can just slip that on here. Don't forget the gasket. It does help reduce noise and vibration. A couple of notes. First is, when you install this, the way we took this out, the pin goes in such a way to where it locks into place. So you want to make sure you put it in the same way. I've tried to put it in the other way to see if I could make it easier to get to the cotter pin. However, it really doesn't. It's actually easier to get it this way. So you'll be pushing your pin through in that direction. You want to fish this whole assembly down in there, and I'm going to just finger tighten the line going down to here. I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to tighten anything up here. So I just want to get that started on the master cylinder. That way I've got plenty of wiggle, so I can get these threads started. That way I can prevent any kind of cross-threading. Another thing to note is that once you get this down in here, you may need to go up under the dash and sort of guide that rod in to where it's supposed to be and get that on the pedal. There's no better time than now. Now, sort of guide this into place. Whoops, got it flipped around. And at this point, since you've got it through the firewall, you can kind of pull it up into place. But before I go much farther, I want to make sure that I get that line started on the outside. All right, let's see if we can fish that line down in and get it started. As a personal preference, I like to try to get it as tight as possible with my fingers at this point. That way, there's less turning with the wrench. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a rag on my fingers and I'll be able to get a little bit better grip. Get a couple more turns out of it. My technique is to basically get this up into place. And I apologize for not being able to show you this as clearly as I would like. But then I push the clutch pedal back far enough to get it started. Insert my pin. And then once the pin's inserted, I can just pull back and it pulls the whole assembly through. So once your pin's in there, you're pretty much home free. Now, at this point, you've got an idea where the cotter pin goes. I try to put it up in through the bottom. All you really need to do, once it's through, is deform it enough to where it's not coming back out. Unfortunately, this new cotter pin's a bit more stout than the old one. As a result, it's a little bit more difficult to bend. But I believe I got it up in there enough. I'll give you a look at it. I think that's good enough. And as you can see, I can pull it straight out next time. Now I can restore my two fasteners in the reverse of how I got them in there. I usually put this one up with two fingers like this, and then I like to do it left-handed. Seems to be easier that way. Now we can snug it up. You don't need to tighten it so much you're going to break something. It's a rookie mistake to over-tighten things. Now when to say when. When. And for my next trick, I am going to finish tightening this line. Apologize for being in the way. But it should only take a couple of turns since I tighten it down by hand. And that's exactly what happened. A couple of turns. I used the open end. You don't necessarily need to use the flare end to tighten it. And then you don't need to tighten it so much that it mushrooms inside the master cylinder. Now let's remount the reservoir. What you see, like, you got that little tab that needs to go into that empty hole. Well, we're done until we need to do the adjustment. But before we do that, let's replace the slave cylinder. Now there's our slave cylinder. The astute viewer may notice that there's a few things missing, like a battery tray and all that stuff. Quite simply, there are two 12mm fasteners under here, but before you knock those loose, I suggest a little bit of penetrating oil and a 10mm tubing wrench for this connection here. To inspect this slave cylinder, you'll usually see some dampness around the outside of it, but you would just pull back this boot like that, and if you see fluid coming out, well, then it's done. This one is not done, but we're replacing the master cylinder, and well, if the slave cylinder failed shortly after that, I'd feel awfully bad, so I'm just going to replace the slave cylinder in addition to the master. Here's the penetrating oil I talked about. Give that a second or two to soak in, then you can come in with that 10mm flare wrench, tubing wrench. Depends on what you feel like calling it. Get it on there, break it loose. Now would be a good time to move your pan underneath this area. This way you can catch any brake fluid that might come out. Okay, line's loose. That just leaves those two 12s that hold it to the transmission. I can hear them dripping right into my pan. Love it when a plan comes together. Without this on here, you can see something pretty clearly, and that is that this is just a rod that goes down into this cup, and all of this is hidden behind that rubber boot. So say for instance you got to put this together. and this piston will not compress for anything. Well, it's quite possible that what has happened is that this rod has somehow gotten out of that cup and is pushing against the side here, and this will not allow it to fully compress. So if you have that issue, just sort of feel around inside that boot, and if you feel that rod has moved outside, then you might need to take this slave cylinder back off so you can get it dropped back down inside that cup. I have had people ask me about that. They said they go to install a slave cylinder, it won't compress, it won't go together. Well, that's what's happening if you have that issue. Okay, here's our new slave cylinder. Now, what I'd like you to do before you install it is once again just push in to get the seals worked and moving. So this way you know that you can compress it. You may find a little rubber cap or a little plastic cap inside the top there that you're going to need to remove. That's the same is true for that master. So now that that's compressed, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to take just a little bit of anti-seize and we'll put it on that ball before I insert it into the clutch fork. And the reason I do that is every once in a while this will get rusted up, and when it does, when you push on the clutch pedal, you'll hear a squeaky door hinge kind of noise, and a lot of times that's due to just a lack of lubrication on that ball. So I just put a little bit of anti-seize on there and it helps prevent that noise. So you don't need the whole can, just a little bit. Now when I put this on here, just like with the master cylinder, I'm going to thread the line into the slave before I do anything. This way I'm assured that that line has gone into the slave cylinder and it's not going to cross thread when I try to get it down in there. Now I might need to compress it a bit to insert my fastener. Once you got the first one in, the second one goes in much easier. Done. Gonna tighten our line the rest of the way. Done. And lastly, I'm going to loosen the bleeder. Now, what you might end up doing, well, there aren't really too many clearance issues here, but on some of these, what I'll do is I'll loosen the bleeder before I even put it down onto the transmission. This will give me an advantage of not having to break it loose while it's in a very precarious position. Now I'm going to top off the master. You can use dot 3 or 4 for this. I'm going to fill it up, and since that bleeder's loose on the slave cylinder now, it'll kind of gravity bleed itself for the moment. What I'll do now is set up an initial adjustment. You want to make it so you do have like just a little bit of free play. I believe the movement on the pedal should be somewhere around 7/16 of an inch. It's not much at all before it actually engages. And the way you do that is you change the effective length of this rod by either turning it clockwise or counterclockwise. And when you do, you've got it seated in such a way to where just a little bit of a push, you've got a little bit of play there. You don't want it to be like right on top of it. You just want just a hair's breadth of play before it actually engages. So I'm not going to be able to have you in here at the same time, but I'm going to make that adjustment, and I'll show you what it turns out to be. And then when you're all done with the adjustment, you tighten that 12mm jam nut, and you're good to go. Might need to push the pedal in a little bit in order to get enough play. That feels actually pretty good right about there. So I'm gonna just run that jam nut down. I'm not gonna run it tight. Just gonna put it there so that there's a little less slop when I go to do stuff here. Now we will start to bleed the system for real. The method that I'm about to show you is probably the crudest method possible. It involves, well, virtually no tools. There are other methods, and they are better. One of them would be to hook up a vacuum bleeder to this and draw the fluid through. That's actually probably the easiest and best way. But the way I'm about to show you is just good old-fashioned pumping and dumping, I guess. I'll start by just finger tightening the screw down, and then I'm going to pump the pedal a few times. And then I'm going to come out here with, I've got my famous little soda bottle with the aquarium tubing coming out of it. Then I'm going to hook up to this to prevent stuff from going everywhere. But also it's going to help me bleed the system out, so that way any fluid that comes back through won't draw any air up with it. Here's that soda bottle I spoke of. 8mm. Open, push to the floor, tighten, pull back up. Repeat, repeat, repeat. It's really great to have a buddy in a situation like this, because you can tell them to push it down, pull it back up, push it down, because what you'll notice is the pedal will just go to the floor and stay there. So it's not going to return at all until we build up some hydraulic pressure here. And that may take a while, but I'm hoping I'm successful. So first we pump, then we open, then we push to the floor. Open. Going to close. And then pull the pedal up. Then open. Push the pedal to the floor. And close. Push the pedal to the floor. Also important to keep the master cylinder topped off during this process. Right, you know you're done when the pedal returns and it feels good. Now, I have a little too much free play there, so that's a problem. So I'm going to alleviate that free play and make it so I only have about this much, just that ever so slight amount, and we will be done with these clutch hydraulics. Same drill as before. We're just gonna change the effective length. In fact, we have too much free play, so we're gonna make it longer. Go out till it bottoms out, and then bring it in like maybe a quarter turn. Then just put that nut down. See how it feels then. So you feel it start to engage. If you don't get this adjustment correct, you can actually damage the clutch. So don't make it so that it's so tight that it's going to burn the clutch up, because then the clutch will be applied all the time. But if you get it too loose, then your clutch will grab like right off the floor. And you don't want that. You want it to start grabbing right about there. Then once you're satisfied with your adjustment, just come in. It's a 12mm, and tighten her down. You can hear that little bit of play that's there. That's what you want. All right, let's wrap this up. Clutch hydraulics, real pain in the butt, but it could save you some cash if you do it yourself. Remember to look for the leakage at the master cylinder, and I also showed you how to check the slave cylinder for leakage. If you see that leakage, it can probably leak for a while before it becomes a problem, but as I stated earlier, if the pedal goes to the floor and pretty much stays there, well, take a look, and I would bet that the master cylinder is probably leaking fluid. I know there's other methods of bleeding that out that don't require such a labor-intensive pain in the butt. Feel free to employ those methods. Go ahead. Something like a vacula or a vacuum bleeder, those things would work fantastic, because they'll draw the fluid right through, pull all the air with it, and you're good to go. One thing I forgot to show you was topping off the master cylinder when you're done. Don't let the master cylinder run dry. Make sure you put the cap on securely. Maybe clean that area up a little bit if there's some brake fluid that got in the paint, because as I said, brake fluid when it gets on paint can cause a problem. Dot 3 or dot 4 is what you would use. If you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com and type in a few keywords into the search function that you will find at the top of the homepage. If you don't find an answer to your query there, feel free to sign up for a form. It's absolutely free. All you need is an email address. However, you must be sure to respond to the confirmation email, so if you don't get one of those, check your spam folder. Once you've done that, you're registered, post away. Ask away. We will do our best to help you. You can also connect with me socially on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I will close this video with the same thing I always close it with. That's be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. I'll see you next time.